Hi everyone, welcome to the Art of Form Building and Exploring New iFormBuilder Input Types. My name is MJ Niscoto. I'll be your host today. I'll be fielding any questions that come up as we're going through the webinar, and Barrett Johannesson will be your presenter. A couple upcoming iFormBuilder events, iFormBuilder certification course that'll be coming up. We're going to be doing this periodically throughout the year. And then also coming up in May 11th, we'll be having our Power User Summit, which is here in Reston, Virginia. If you'd like more information about that, either through the chat or after the webinar, please send Barrett or myself an email and we can get definitely more information out about that. But just a quick overview of what that is. Last year, I believe, was our first one. We invite anyone that's really taking iFormBuilder to the next level to come in and present to show us so we can learn how to make it better and to show others that are using the platform to see what's really possible. It's a really good time and a lot can be gathered from it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, MJ, and thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for today's session. Just to reiterate some of the things that MJ mentioned earlier about our upcoming events, we have our certification program, and those are actually links that you can click on when you get this PDF. But that certification program has done wonders for some of these companies who have really taken advantage of them because it's a 2-day event, 4 hours on each session, but it's really a crash course on getting to understand the iFormBuilder platform and how to use best practices, as well as how to deploy successful projects. And we go into advanced form building, so starts with some of the basics, but then really goes into a lot more advanced structure with building out more functionality in your forms. Also, the Power User Summit is awesome, and like MJ said, it's great to come and learn from some of the other experts out there in the form builder or the iFormBuilder environment. But if you're not a long user, or if you wouldn't consider yourself a power user right now, I would still urge you to attend to learn what other people are using iFormBuilder for. That being said, let's talk about what we're going to go through today. So I'm going to start by going through the different support options that you have when you are building your form. So within iFormBuilder, we'll go through some of the best practices, and we'll go through the Form Builder Golden Rules. We'll start building a form, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end if there are some remaining questions. Like MJ said, though, as I go through this, if I'm going too fast or if there's something you'd like more information on, just put it in the chat, and he will mention them to me so that we can get those answered right away. So our iFormBuilder support. To start, we have a Customer Success Center. Not only in that Customer Success Center do we have help desk articles, videos, and getting started section, as well as the iFormBuilder Academy, but we have a section where you can actually chat with one of our agents. So I'm just going to open this up. And this is our Customer Success Center if you haven't visited it before. The PDF that we share with you later will have this link in case you don't have it. In this bottom corner, this is where you get to chat with one of our agents. So let's say you have a specific question and you've been searching our knowledge base and you just can't seem to find the answer that you're looking for, then be sure to ask our agent, and he or she will get back to you with how to do that functionality. Also, I would urge you to sign up to have an account within our Zendesk environment, so our support environment. The reason that it's truly helpful to have an account here is, number one, you're able to track your activities. So if you submit a request to our help desk, you're able to track if they've been able to respond to that, if the ticket is essentially open, closed, or in progress, so that you can know that they are still working on it, or if they've finished it, they will let you know as well. Also, in that activities, you're able to follow certain articles within this environment. So let me go ahead and sign in and show you what that would look like. So now that I'm signed in, this interface looks exactly the same, but if I go to our release notes, then you'll notice that there's this follow and unfollow button in the corner. By following this article, you're able to receive email alerts the second we post a new release, so that you're aware of things that are coming to the platform or when they're coming to the platform. This could be new input types, it could be new changes to the environment, as well as if there are any bug fixes that we're currently doing. So I'd urge you to sign in and then follow this article. Also, if I go back to our Customer Success Center, we have our community. And this is really driven by the people, you guys, and this is actually where we really love to have you interact, and we actually depend on it. So we have this section called Add and Vote for New Ideas. This is where if you do have anything that you really would like to see in the platform, come in here and put your idea in here. If it gets to the top of the list, then we're going to implement that into the iFormBuilder platform. Also come in here and make sure that you upvote some of the other ideas that you really like so that those can also get to the top of the list. Another piece that I want to show off that we have here is that we have this Share What You Know About Form Building forum. This is where we have this new package builder that we've created, and you can actually host some of these form packages that you've created. If you want to share it with some other people, come in here and put up those form packages so that they can have access to those as well. Lastly, when we're in our Customer Success Center, we have our iFormBuilder Academy. If you go into the iFormBuilder Academy, you'll see our Getting Started guide, but you'll also see our free iFormBuilder training sessions, the upcoming schedule, as well as our recordings. If I come in here, we've actually transitioned to have all of the upcoming training sessions on our other webinar page, but every recording that we have will always come over and be placed here. And if you wanted to follow this article as well, then every time we put in a new post or add a new recording, you can come in here and you'll be notified of the new recording that we have. So just to show you where the upcoming list is, this is if you go to the Learn More section on iFormBuilder.com and go to Webinars, it'll bring you over here and you can see the upcoming webinars, special topic recordings, as well as training recordings. Lastly, we do offer some services. So if you are interested in having us build out some of your forms or helping you accelerate your mobile workflow, whether it's building an integration with systems, we are happy to help. So we have implementation support and professional services, as well as training if that's something that you're interested in. And if I haven't mentioned it yet, our next Form Builder certification course is in February. It's on February 9th, and that's from 10 to 2 Eastern Standard Time, as well as February 11th from 10 to 2 Eastern Standard Time. Our March one is going to be for the AU folks and everyone who's over on the other side of the world. So if you're one of those individuals, be sure to sign up for that session. So we're going to start with just going through some of these form building basics. The first thing that you're always going to do, or you always should do, is your initial project considerations. So some of the things you need to think about are, what devices will the end users have access to? Are they going to be larger devices like tablets or iPads, or will they be using the smaller devices? Are they going to be using Android devices or iOS devices? This is really important to think about when you're building your form, and keeping in mind these devices when you're building your form, because some of the functionality that you build in is only on iOS, or sometimes you don't want to have too much text if you're using those smaller devices. So you need to think about that when you are building out your projects. Another big initial project consideration is just what naming convention do you use for your form and your option list. When you're just getting started, you probably aren't thinking about this, but as time goes on and your Form Builder account grows with how many forms that you have, it is a huge benefit to have placed in a naming convention when you first started, so that not only can you identify what forms go together, like what's a parent form versus a child form, but also if you wanted to have people put in their first name or their initials in the beginning of every form that they build, it'll make it a little easier to identify who's working on those forms if you have a lot of hands in those projects. Another piece is that by using a naming convention, and I'll show you an example of one in just a second, when it comes to assigning forms, you're able to quickly identify what is that top layer form so that you don't have to assign the child form and whatnot. And the next initial project consideration is just, how do you structure the form? So where can you separate your form and build it in different subforms so that it's a better user experience and it's actually better for your upload and download speed if you do have subforms. You also want to think about what element input types do you use for each question. So we have over 40 different input types available for your projects, and I'll show you what those look like today, so it gives you kind of an idea of what all of them are and how they function. But it's really important to think about these different input types so that when you're asking the question, you're getting the response that is best for that type of question. For instance, if I'm asking you to choose a number between 1 and 10 being how great is this experience, or this is the best experience ever, and 1 being this is the worst experience ever, instead of putting in an option list 1 through 10, I could use the range widget, and all the user would have to do is slide the bar up and down to select how they felt about this training session. So that's just something to think about, and that's just a quick example on really how that can impact your data collection. The last one is, where can I add form functionality? So the use of our smart controls to cut down on human error, user input, and post data cleansing. So a lot of folks, they explain to us that they get so annoyed because they have to go back and they have to change people's responses and they have to edit it. Well, if you build your form smartly, you don't have to actually go back and do that data cleansing because you're already getting the responses that you want. If you want to learn more about using the smart controls, our next session in February is going to go through advanced form building, and we're going to go through using smart controls and how to add and build smart forms. This whole session is really about designing forms and getting started building your forms. And just to note, it is an art form. It's not just plugging in and dragging things along. It does take some time to really map out how to build a successful project with iFormBuilder. This is just a quick silly note. If you are using our help desk, as well as even the PDF that I'm going to share with you today, and even what I'm going to say, I may call it a widget, an input type, an element input type. Those are all referencing the same thing, where it's really just that field that we're adding to our form. So keep that in mind as we go forward too. I don't want to confuse you if I call it a widget one time and an input type the next. Continuing with some of these best practices, I mentioned to you to use a naming convention. This is just an example of the one that I use, where I always start every form with the parent form name. So no matter if it is the parent form or if it's a subform that I'm attaching to the parent form, I always start it with the same name. Then if it's the parent form, I'll just end it with _p. If it's a subform, then I'll add a couple more details on what that subform is about and then end it with _c. Some people will choose to have it be _s for subform, but I usually think of it as a parent and child relationship, so that's why I use the p and the c. To show you a quick example, I'm going to bring up my FormBuilder account. And this is where you're able to see kind of where I've used this naming convention and how having that P and C and even DB, if I'm using the smart table lookup, I'll have it end with DB to make my life a little bit easier. When it comes to using this naming convention, if you go to create new forms, once you're in your form builder, this table name underneath here is where you're going to use that naming convention. So the form label can be user-friendly and it's what the user is going to see on their device. Well, this table name is going to keep you organized, and really, I'm telling you, it'll remove all headaches when it comes to assigning forms, as well as when you're looking at your Form Builder home page where you have that list of forms. The other consideration that we have is just for building for the device type. I already mentioned how you have to keep in mind what devices the users are going to have access to, because there are differences between the iOS and the Android. But one other piece that I want to mention here is that you always want to build for the smallest device. So on our iPhones and our smaller Android phones, when we look at a select option list, and the select option list is where you see those buttons here on a specific form. When you look on those smaller devices, if you have too many options, the user might not be able to read it, and then they may not be able to answer that question accurately, because the select option list, if it's text heavy, some of the text will be hidden. And so you need to make sure that when you are building your form and you are using the select option list, that you have tested it on those smaller devices so that all questions are readable and that you will get a good response from your users. Another widget that has this kind of functionality where it could cut off some of the text is the toggle widget. And so make sure, again, that you've tested on the smallest device when you're using either the select option list or the toggle widget. With Android devices, they do tend to wrap some of the text, but still sometimes that can be really confusing for the user. So again, I just suggest making sure that you've tested it and it all looks okay on the smallest device that you have. Some of our best practices is just make sure you have a device handy when you're building your forms. I know that sounds silly, but especially when you start adding a lot of smart controls, you need to be testing your forms constantly. And so having that device with you, being able to sync to make sure everything looks right, will save you a lot of time and a lot of headache if you weren't to do that. Because as you can imagine, if you built a whole form and maybe there's hundreds of questions and you didn't test it on your device, and then you find that the form is crashing, you'll then have to go through and eliminate where that error is actually occurring. So if you're constantly testing on your form, then you're constantly going to be able to see that it's working properly and it's appearing the way that you want it to. And this is kind of more of a reminder, but when you are building your forms, every single form that you build will automatically be assigned to your username, which is great because then when it comes to testing, you don't have to go through the form assignment, you already have it. But one thing to keep in mind here is if you're building a form that has subforms attached to it, of course, all the subforms are also going to appear on your device. So you may want to go under form assignment and unassign any of the subforms so you can see exactly what the user will see when they log into their iForm homepage. Again, when assigning forms to users, you really only need to assign the parent form because all the attached subforms will automatically come with it, as well as if you're using the Smart Table Search functionality and you have a lookup table and a database table, then that will also be downloaded locally to the user's device and you don't have to assign it to them. And the next best practice here is to try to limit the amount of elements on the parent form. Really where I'm coming from here is that you don't want to have 100 questions on that parent form. Number one, you don't want to do that because that's a lot for your users. That's a lot that they have to scroll through, and if they lose track of where they are, they have to go searching through their form and whatnot. So I kind of try to think of my users there and not add 100 different questions. But another reason here is that by adding over 100 questions just on a parent form, that is going to impact the upload and download speed of that form. So instead of having those 100 questions in a parent form, it's best to break it into subforms, and then you could have maybe 500, 600 questions, but it'll still be a faster sync because you're using subforms and it's uploading and downloading through subform and parent form structures. The next one here is that when you get started to build advanced forms, I strongly suggest having multiple browser windows or tabs open to make sure that you can copy and paste the different data column names to actually eliminate your own human error there. The last one, and one of the most important ones here, is when you're building forms, make sure you always follow our Form Builder golden rules. You might be asking, well, what are those golden rules? Well, here you are. The first one is always test before going live. The worst thing in the world is you spend all this time building out your form, you assign it to your users, and then they come back 5 minutes later or the next day and say, hey, sorry, yesterday was a waste because I couldn't collect any data because the form wasn't working properly. So make sure that you test it. You have maybe even a beta testing group. You have your friend, your neighbor, everybody test your form to make sure that it's working properly, but also it's nice to have an extra set of eyes there to make sure spelling is correct. The second golden rule here is to make sure that when you're building out your form, in our comment section, you'll see label and you'll also see data column name. The label is what the user is going to see on their device as far as for the question, and the data column name is what's used when we're storing that data in our database. This data column name needs to be unique because if it's not, you're going to receive an error message. let me just come on over and pop into my form builder and show you what that would actually look like. So I am going to just start this with my name. And right now I'll have this set as the table name based off of the form label. I'm going to uncheck that box in a second though. So I'll say Barrett's 101 form demo. And because this is a parent form, I'm going to just uncheck the based on label section and then do _P. So now that I've saved this form, I want to just show you what's going to happen when you use a term that's not database friendly. So I'm going to add a new input. For the label, I'm going to put it as location. And I'm going to keep this as the data column name as location, just so you can see what this looks like. So if I go to save my form, I now receive this error message saying data column name location is not allowed. So most of us think, okay, well, I'm just going to add a new input. I'll change it. I can keep the label as location, but the data column name, I'm going to update that to be GPS _ location. That seems fine, but if I go to save, I still get that error message. So I'm going to keep getting this error message until I reload this whole window. So I can reload this window, which will bring us back to my Form Builder menu. I can also click the load button. That'll also bring us back to our Form Builder menu. Once in here, I just want to open up my form again. And once I load the form, I still have this location here. This was the second one that I added, but it kept giving me that error message. But as you can see, now that my data column name was database friendly, I was able to save and all is well. The next piece that we have here is to make sure that when you have a live form, if you plan on making changes to that live form, make sure that you do not change the input type, the data size, or the encryption of an element on the live form, because it will delete the data, which would be horrible because you would have spent so much time collecting that data. So when this occurs, what we want to do is we actually want to come in here. We had this location field. I had it set as a text, but I want to change the input type because I remembered that there's actually a location widget. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to duplicate the original element and then select the original one, go into where it says input properties, check the box that says disabled. By checking the box for disabled, this field is no longer going to be downloaded to the user's device, but it will still keep that row of data that had previously been collected for that field. This duplicate is now going to make an additional row of data in my database, and I can make any changes that I need to this field. I may want to come back up here and take away the one, so the label is still location. And I can put this as GPS _ location 1. The data column name still needs to be unique. I can't have it set as what the old one was because this is in our database. It's going to be a new row. At this point, I can save my form with the change that I've done so far. All right, MJ, any questions before we get started into building our forms?
So far, Barrett, there's not any questions.
All right, thank you. So to start, I'm going to bring up my device and I'm going to show you some of the different element input types that we have available for you. Once I do that, we're going to go into actually building the form. And just bear with me here. Okay, once in iForm, I need to sync my device to make sure that I have all the most up-to-date requirements. If you have auto sync turned on, then your form would automatically be here. But you'll notice I now see my Barrett's 101 form demo. Today I just want to go through with you the different input types that we have. And what's great is I'll actually send you a form package. So you're going to be able to import this into your own account if you'd like to kind of see what this looks like or have access to all the different input types that we have. The first one is I use the attachment widget, and actually what I'll do is I'll put this over here. So we have a list of the different input types, and now I also have my device. The attachment widget, you can add an MOV file, a PDF, and a JPEG. On iOS devices, any attachment that you have is actually going to be downloaded and stored locally on the user's device. So if they don't have connection, they can still access those files. On Android devices, most of these will also be downloaded and stored locally. I believe MOV files are the only exception. Android devices won't be able to access those in the offline environment. But using the attachment widget as another resource for your users is great, especially if they're just getting started using the iFormBuilder platform. So for this attachment, I had a PDF attached for just the smart form building from one of our past sessions. The Assign To widget allows you to assign a record to a user, so someone else who has access and has been assigned to this form. You can also assign it back to yourself if you needed to. The Counter widget is exactly how it sounds. You're able to tap the plus button or the minus button and go through that. That's great if you have a project where maybe you have to count trees in a certain area, or you have to count individuals who are coming to an event. So that is, instead of counting it and tallying it up in your head, by just every time you see one, pressing the plus button makes your life a lot easier. The date field is just a Rolodex, and you're able to select today, and you can also go for the future dates and past dates. The date and time looks very similar. The drawing with the annotation functionality is iOS only, and I'll just show you briefly what this looks like. So you're able to take a picture, and you can use that photo as a background or a floating image. If I set it as the background, then if I needed to, I can also take another picture. Maybe I really want to zoom in here on that tree or that sign. And once I take that photo, I can set that as a floating image, and I can set as many floating images as I want. So maybe I wanted to really kind of zoom in on that area on that sign, so the user can actually kind of see where that problem area is.
Hey Barrett, just had a good question come in. How can you tell if the data column name is database friendly or not?
That is a wonderful question, and we actually have a web or help desk article on terms that are database friendly. And if I come over here, this reserved word list is actually a link that will, when you click on it in our PDF, it'll bring you to the article. I can just go in here now, and I can put this in the chat to give you an idea. So this with the annotation, I could also draw on this field. I can put text. I can add shapes. There's also different, if I wanted to bring in images from my camera roll or another folder on my device, I can do that. I can bring in some of these icons. So maybe I want to put that over to where that sign was broken. And I hit done, and voila, it's saved there. We have our email, which you're able to add, allow the user to put in the short name, and you can actually attach an option list to it so that they can select one of the email domains. You don't have to, but that's a great way to make it a little easier if they are going to always have the same domains. The Esri widget, if this is in the parent form, it's launched at the start of the form, and the user must have connection to be able to use it. The image allows for the user to take a photo. And some of these you can go into a little bit more detail when I send you the form package, and you can kind of test them as well. The location is a field that always needs to be, I guess the user always has to go into this field and refresh their location to get the most up-to-date information. Unfortunately, I forgot to bring a barcode with me, but our Manatee Works widget allows for you to actually scan a lot of different barcodes. I think they have 7 or 8 symbologies that you can choose from, and then you could pass the data into a text area underneath. You don't have to do that. Instead, if you want to parse out data into different fields, you could also do that. Our multi-select allows you to choose multiple selections, as you can imagine. The number widget is just allows for the numbers. Notice that it says type numbers here. If you see this, every time a new window pops up, if I've added a description to that field in my form builder, then it'll be displayed here. This is extremely helpful if you have longer questions, because a lot of times if you do have a longer question, it's not all going to fit in this header section that we have. And so by placing it in the input type description, then the user is able to reference what's actually being asked of them instead of having to go back to the parent form to see the longer question. I'll show you where to put that in just a moment as well. Then we have a phone number. The phone number is one of our 3 masking widgets. So we have phone number, zip code, and social security number masking widgets. And you can customize these masks so that if you wanted to eliminate or change how the mask is being used or the widget's being used, you can do that. The pick list is another one of our option lists that has a longer list of the different options, and the user can only select one from this list. Underneath it, that's our range widget where I mentioned to you earlier. I can set the range. Right now I have it 1 to 10, but if I wanted to have it 1 to 100 or whatever it may be, I can put that in here. You can also default where this the range is always listed to, and that's with some of the smart controls. Next, we have the read-only input type. This is what you're always going to use if you're using your smart controls and you're trying to default a specific field, whether to be a timestamp or using the iFormBuilder built-in functions. Even if you're doing some kind of calculation or concatenation, this is where you want to use the read-only input type. This is the select option list, which should only be used when you have a limited amount of options. It's great use for yes, no, and non-applicable. Signature, there we go. You're also able to capture some sound and some audio. So maybe you're doing an interview. Instead of having someone type that out the whole time, you can instead record it and come back to it later. The social security number is another masking widget. I'll skip that for now. The text here is, this is really basic, but you can also change the keyboard, and when we go into the form builder, I'll show you where you can change the different keyboard types. One thing I want to point out though is people are always asking, hey, is there a way to annotate to the device so that it can, I don't have to be typing everything, instead it'll just fill it in? Well, if you're using iOS devices and you have an if you're using Android and iOS devices and you have connection, the device itself already has the functionality. So with the iOS, it's just clicking the Siri. Type here for me, please. And there we go. So I didn't have to type it. So it makes it a lot easier if you do have that functionality. And that's just something most people don't think about, but I wanted to point that out to you. The time widget. We also have our newest and most exciting one, or one thing that I'm really excited about, which is our timer. So if I hit start here, this timer is going to keep going until I submit this record at the end, or until I hit the stop button. So if you're asking someone to measure for 60 seconds a specific field, then you can actually have them time the 60-second on their device. This currently is only iOS, but hopefully it'll be with the Android soon as well. The toggle, there's that checkbox, but this is the toggle widget is where I mentioned you want to be sensitive to how much text you place in the label. Unique ID is always populated once the record is completed. Some folks, what they'll do is they'll use the built-in function iFormBuilder.username and the unique ID to create a unique ID for every time a user submits a record. The zip is used for a zip code, and there's even more input types that I didn't include here, but those should give you at least some idea of what we have. One other example that I want to show you here is with the timer widgets, just how advanced it can actually get. So for this example, I have swimmer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's say they're starting their laps, and they start at different times. So I'm just going to have different timers for each one of those. You'll notice they keep going until I hit stop. So I could actually have as many timers as I needed here. And they continue until I manually come in here and say stop. And what I've done is I'm taking the sum of the swimmer's time and the average swim length. So it's really, really neat on the timer widget and really how to start using it. I didn't add a requirement for how many digits are in here, but that's something that you could do with the smart controls as well. All right, any questions, MJ?
Yes. With the timer widget, if you were to put one at the beginning of the form and then possibly hide a field at the end for like calculating how long someone was doing an inspection or how long someone was doing an audit, is that possible?
So what you'd probably actually want to do is you'd want to have the timer widget and have it so that it had start, and then you don't actually have to add an additional field. The second that they submit that record, that timer is going to stop, and you're going to be able to see the result of how long it took them to complete that field. In the first part of form building, once you say that you're going to create a new form, you're brought to the Edit Form Properties page. This is where, again, that form label is what the user is going to see on their device. The table name is where you want to use your naming convention. And this description is a great tool to really tell the user what this form's about, but also give them helpful links or contact information. So if I were to say, need assistance, contact, and then I can just put my email address here. And by doing so, it actually, on my device, it'll launch the email client and fill in my email address so that you can type in any questions that you have. The other piece here is you can add a link. So I could go to my webinar sessions, and I can put a link in there in the description so that if they wanted to view them there, it is available to them. A lot of times what you'll use is a web page where maybe they're getting support, so a customer success center, and any other, if you wanted to add a phone number, that's also possible. So the description for a form can be more powerful or as powerful as you want to make it. Underneath that, we have our form icon, and this can be, you can use one that we already have in here, but you don't have to. So for this URL, I could just Google search an image. MJ, do you have an image that I should look for?
Anything to do with food right now, Barrett? I skipped lunch.
All right, so let's do popcorn. Oops, I totally misspelled popcorn there. Let me go back here. And what I need to make sure here is that with the images that I'm going to take, I need to make sure, number one, that it's not a huge image, because every time this icon is going to be downloaded to my device, it's going to take some time to sync. So I want to make sure this is as small as can be. The other thing is I want to make sure it's a PNG file. The iOS devices don't really mind as much what type of file it is, but Android devices definitely do. So to make my life easier in Google, I'm just going to go to the advanced search, going to go into where it has the image size. I'm going to choose icon, and then at the bottom where it says file type, I'm just going to use PNG and go for my advanced search. There we have some great icons here. I'll just take one of these happy popcorn buckets, and if I go to view image, it's going to give me the URL, and as you see, it ends with PNG there, so I know it's going to work. Go back over to my form, and where it has the URL section, I'm just going to paste that URL. So now when I open up my form, I'm going to have that image in the home page for this particular form. The next piece I want to just talk about here, and I've given you a description on everything in our Edit Form Properties page. So if the reference IDs, we have 5 different reference IDs. So let me try to do this where I have both screens going. So the reference ID section, this is a great way to customize your form and your workflow even more. With like reference ID 1, you can choose how a record is submitted. So if you only want the user to submit one record per day or only during a certain time period, that's where reference ID 1 can really come in handy. Reference ID 2 allows you to configure what fields in a table are being viewed. And reference ID 4 overrides a device setting for delete on upload. Reference ID 3 goes through, and this is where you can actually configure another section of the description of a form when they look at it on their device. But reference ID 5 I really love because you're able to customize the form menu colors. So if I were to look at my iForm, and this is just a little screenshot, these colors are what I can customize. What I've done for you here is I've actually mapped out which one of those reference ID 5s that you would use for adding those colors. You can use all of these, or you can, maybe you only want to customize the border around a specific form. Then you'd only need to use one of these. Why I really like these though, not only because it adds a nice visual aspect to your iForm homepage, but also if you do this in a successful way, where if you have a user who's a part of 5 different projects, and those projects may have multiple forms, each project could be a different color, so they can quickly see, this is my project for community service, this is my project for inventory, this is my project for social media, whatever it may be. By adding a color scheme, it really helps them when they're looking at their FormBuilder homepage. So all the other pieces here, I give you lots of description on in the PDF, but also our help desk. Now going back to the form that we were working on, I've kind of walked you through some of this, but I just want to point out in our form building page and on the actual form builder itself what some of these sections are. So the common, that's our label and our data column name that's going to be unique, but this description is where you're able to add additional information for the user if it is a field that opens up a new window. So let's go ahead and add a new input, and for this one I'll call it, so I'll make it a longer question. All right, so I'm just going to do this for a little while. Hopefully that's not too annoying on your ear, but you can see that it's a lot longer. So to make it easier for my user, I'm going to take that description, or I'm going to take that label and put it in the description so the user has it available on their device when they're actually answering the question. The next part of our form builder is our input properties page. So this is where you're able to select the different input types that we have, and if you hover over any of these, it'll give you a description on what those different input types are used for. So as I mentioned earlier, we have three different types of option lists. We have the select, the multi-select, and the pick list, but also the email widget can also use the option list. So here I'm just going to choose the select. Oops, actually, let me put this as a pick list. And then once I've selected a option list type, I then go to our option list section and I go into our option list manager. Once in here, if I want to add a new option list, then I press the plus button. And after I've done that, at the very top, then I'll see an area that has the pound sign and says my option list. I come over here, I edit this, so I'll call this Jan Demo. And since MJ's so hungry, we'll say ice cream, popcorn, soda, candy, and nachos. So everything that you can get at the movie theater. Now that I've added all my options here, if I wanted to do some more advanced functionality, I would come into the advanced section of my option list manager, and this is where I'd actually see the index value as well as the key value, which I'm going to show you in a few minutes why that is important to remember. This conditional value is adding some, if you want to add a segmented option list, but this key value can be edited, but you need to have this key value unique. If you wanted to add images to your form, you could use the icons URL. After you've created your form, you're going to save your list, and by saving your list, it's not automatically assigned to your element. So you need to then select it from your option list manager and assign list to element. And then click save. Or if you have autosave turned on, that works fine as well. Oopsies, bear with me 1 second here. All right, the next thing that I want to do is I want to add a new input, and I'm going to keep this as a text just to show you some other options that you have. So in the input properties, you also can encrypt an element, and if you encrypt it, you have to add an encryption key, And for that process, check out our help desk and we can go through that a little bit more detail. This is where you disable a field if you're no longer using it or if you want to change it and it was on a live form. You want to mark a field as required, so they need to complete that before they submit their form to the cloud or the record to the cloud. Then you check this box here. This read-only checkbox I never use. Where I showed you earlier with the read-only input type, I had selected read-only from the drop-down list. That's if you're doing any kind of calculation or if a field's being generated by a field in the form currently, then you want to make sure that you use the input type and not the read-only checkbox. For these text fields, you can also choose the data size for that specific input. So if I want to make sure that they don't go over 6 characters, I can limit this to 6. But a best practice that I always have is make sure that in the description I tell the user that they can't go over 6. If I wanted to add an attachment, I could do that here, and then below that is where I can choose what kind of keyboard the user is going to have access to for this specific field. The option list manager we just went through, and let me actually, for the next piece here, let's go through the process of adding a subform. So the first thing I want to do is, before I do that, hold on, let's come back here. So these are the different option lists that we have available, and like I mentioned, I just walked through this process with you, but you can refer back to this later if you need to. The select option list is the buttons, the pick list has that list go through it, and the multi-select looks like the pick list, but the user can select multiple options. If you ever need to edit a live option list, we also have some best practices, and that is one of the first ones is always add a new option at the very bottom of the list. That way the index value and the key value is not changing. Because if it is a live form and the index value or the key value changes, then any data that you previously collected will be lost. If you wanted to have it set up for a certain order, you can use, in the condition value, let's say you no longer want to have Paul on that list, the condition value you'd put in false, and where Fred started, you'd put in true. I've mapped out the different, when you're looking at option list data, what you'll see, so be sure to check that out later on. But now going into the subforms, not only are you able to impact the upload and download speed, but with the subforms, you're able to allow the user to be limited to only make one record, or they can take as many as they want. So a lot of times, the iFormBuilder team would suggest to you to use a photo subform as a child form so that the user can take as many images without feeling restricted. Now let's jump back over to our form, and this new element, we're actually going to change the input type to subform. Once I do that, I'm going to go into my smart paging, and it's at this point that I'll see a list of all the forms that I have in my account. Now, if I hadn't created the subform when I first launched my parent form here, then I won't actually see that form on this list. So what I'd want to do is I'd have to refresh this whole window, reopen my form, and at that point I'll see the newest form that I created. So for this example though, I'm going to go ahead and select one of my photo subforms, and under the link mode, I'm going to set this to multiple. Another option that I have is the separate table view. So because I'm allowing the user to take multiple pictures, if I don't want it to keep going back to the parent form, and instead I want to have a separate table, then I would check off this box. And when I bring up my device in a few minutes, I'll show you how that appears. And lastly, if we keep going here, our smart controls is really where we go through a lot more detail in our next session. The smart table search is also talked about briefly in our following section, but it allows for you to call to a database and then pre-populate some of your form fields. Our reference ID, this is an element reference ID, so we had the table reference ID or the form reference IDs that we mentioned before, but here's some of the element reference IDs that we have. So if you're using our PDF or our HTML report, and you want to really customize what elements are being displayed in those reports, then you'd want to use these reference IDs. There's element skip report, element skip email, and PDF. But also, if you have subforms, like we've just added to ours, that it's a multi-link subform, but you want to allow the user a better experience, where every time they take a picture and they submit a subform record, it then relaunches a brand new subform record. So by doing that, it makes it so they don't have to go back to the parent form. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to duplicate my subform element. And for this one, I'm going to make this keep it as multiple, but uncheck the box that says separate table. And in the reference ID, I'm going to place element, I'm sorry about that. I'm going to do subform underscore batch underscore mode. The other time that I would use a reference ID would it be if I'm using the counter widget and I want to change the increment that's going up or down for that counter widget. In the PDF that I'm sharing with you, I also have some timer widget facts for you, so that individual who is interested early in their timer, I would suggest checking out and going to our help desk article on the use of the timer. So before I go any further, let me go ahead and bring up my device again. And while I'm doing that, MJ, are any questions coming in?
No, Barrett, oh, hold on, one just came in right now. Hold on one sec.
Sure.
I have a form, but when I sync with a JSON string, I try the key underscore value. How can I try label value? How can I try to label value?
Can you repeat that, MJ?
Yep. I have a form, but when I sync with a JSON string, I try the key underscore value. How can I try label value?
Okay, so I'm assuming that this individual is using I'm assuming they're talking about option lists here. And if that's the case, then they would want to use our built-in function for ZC display value. And the ZC display value, it'll take the label of the user selection and place it in an additional field. So if this was, let's say, I'll just pop over here quickly. We have our pick list here. I'm going to add a new input underneath, and I'll say display option label. And this is discussed in our next session, like I mentioned. I need to get this pick list data column name, which is really long here, but I'll go back to my text, go into my smart control in the dynamic value and do ZC display underscore, display value underscore, and then paste in the data column name and hit save, and I'll refresh my form. And then what it'll do is whatever selection I place in that option list, it'll then show me the label in that field underneath. All right, so as you can see, we have our cute little popcorn icon. Oops, let me go back. And once here, this is our info button where we see a description. So I have my email and I have that link. So if I click on my email, it'll automatically launch a new message, which is great, especially with supporting your users. Then if I launch this form, I have my location widget. And as I said, here's my really, really long question. If I go to my, oops, I should have set this up as a text field. Let me go back. Sorry about that, you guys. I'm just going to duplicate this input and change this to a text field again. And I'll come back to show you what that will look like. Okay, and maybe I'll show you on another time what that will look like, but it would show in the details section. But now let me go into my pick list. If I choose popcorn, immediately underneath that, I see the label that was selected. Then we go into my subform element that I set for a multi-link and for a photo. And I'll just choose from my photo library. And I think this is just my screenshot. There we go. And I can add comments. Now, once I hit submit, I brought back to this table view, and so this is that separate table view checkbox that we did. Now if I go back to my parent form and I go to my element 2, I'll take another photo, and once I hit submit here, then it'll relaunch, because I added that subform batch mode, it relaunches a new subform record to be captured. Also, because I didn't have separate table view, then my subform table is right under the subform element on the parent form. So just in closing, to add more to your form, I have all these different links available for you to check out and look into if you're interested in doing any of those. I also, if you are running into an error where your form is crashing, these are some of the steps that I suggest to kind of troubleshoot where that problem is occurring. Then I've included our recent iFormBuilder releases. These are the last couple months we have the form packages, which because I'm going to give you one of these forms, I'm going to build a package for you, and I'm going to share it as a public package, so it'll be a URL. If you don't know how to import packages, then be sure to check out this link and to assist you, and so you can have this form in your account. We also have stored filters, which are great if you're looking for a quick and easy way to edit a lot of records. Now, I know that sounds silly because we're building stored filters, but with the stored filters, you then have the table edit view, which is how you can really edit your data a lot faster. We have a newer API that came about in the last couple months. So if you are or have a developer, check out our newest versions. And just a big thank you for all of you who attended. In the next 48 hours, you'll receive that email with the web page that will have the recording of a session, a demo form for you to import into your account, this PDF, as well as, if you're interested, we have a new form builder coming out, and we'd love for you to be a beta tester. So I have a survey that I'm going to put up there for anyone who's interested in being one of those. Thank you all for taking time out of your schedule, and enjoy the rest of your day.